Bay's business address is Money Talk 1010 AM and available on HD at 99.5 HD2. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Money Talk 1010 AM, Tampa Bay's business address.
The views and opinions expressed on the following show are those of Morgan Streetman and are not those of Beasley Media Group, this station, its management, or other hosts or advertisers. On Money Talk 1010 AM, it's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there'll probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
I think we have the headset issue figured out. It's Monday. Give us a break. It's the Morgan Streetman Show. I'm Roxanne Wilder. So good to see you, Morgan.
It's good to be here, Roxanne. And we're just having some fun in the studio because you've got about 4 different headphones strapped around your neck right now, all together. It's like a headphone octopus.
Yeah. We can play the old telephone game, tin can game. You tie a tin can to the strings and you run around down the hall and just hang on to these and we'll have fun, like exactly. A little walkie-talkie.
Sarge, we need some more headphones. We need some more headphones. He was just in the booth there, so I'm giving him a hard time. But boy, we have got a lot of interesting stuff to cover today. And we got to take a quick look back at this because then we're going to jump in. We've got a special guest in studio I'm very excited about, and we got a lot of fun things to cover. But we wanted to take a quick look back first, and that is at the Vegas shooting. Mm-hmm. And remember, we're coming up on, it hasn't quite been a year.
October 1st? Was that October 2nd? Was that what the date was? Yeah.
I think that's right. So about
we're 3
10
months away from the anniversary. So sad.
Well, it was a real tragedy, and isn't it a tragedy that we still to this day don't know what the motive was or what actually happened? And of course, as we've been over on the show, there are so many questions about what happened there. But one thing that they told us for sure, and they've kind of repeated themselves on this over and over again, is that it was not a terrorist attack. We've been told that.
The FBI told us that. Anyone who's been investigating the case told us that. Any statements that have come out that have said this is not a terrorist attack. Right.
It's all about that lone gunman, Stephen Paddock, and, we just don't even know what the story was, and he just maybe went off the deep end and decided to do this horrible, horrible thing. Well, what's happened now, and I think this is particularly interesting for all of you folks that like to visit casinos and stuff. Mm-hmm. I tell you, because when you're a guest of a casino, if something happens to you, they don't bat an eyelash at, making things, what I would say, a little bit tough for you. So what MGM has done, and we've talked, at length about MGM's involvement in the Vegas shooting and many other things and their connections to some of the Saudi royals and that sort of thing. We've covered a lot of that, but what they've just done recently, I think it's been about a week since they've filed this. Yeah, they filed it on Friday, July 13th in Nevada and California. They filed a lawsuit against the victims. Can you believe that? MGM filed a lawsuit against the victims of the shooting.
Way to play defense with offense.
Well, yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's exactly what they're doing. And it's a kind of a lawsuit called a declaratory judgment action, which means that they've asked the court to basically take a look at something and make a legal declaration about it. That's not necessarily the same as a lawsuit for damages, and maybe it can happen a little faster because the court can take a look at it. But I have to say that when they were kicking this around the corporate offices there and making the decision, somebody should have said, I personally think that we will not go suing these victims, because what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to now hire a lawyer to file papers and defend this case, or otherwise we're just going to win by default. It's a pretty, in my book, it's a pretty tough way to treat victims. Now, can they do it legally? Well, so far, apparently they can.
So how does that work? So they, just like you described, they're going to sue the victims, and the victims, I would guess that all the victims are suing MGM. Is that it? So
no, they aren't. And actually, there are a number of people who have actually sued and dismissed, and other people have been talking about suing. What they're suing for, though, MGM is suing for, is something called a declaratory judgment, which is different than a typical lawsuit for damages, where I'm saying you owe me money for something. Either you owe me money for a contract or something wrong that you've done to me. This is different. This is saying, court, would you please tell us what our rights are in this situation? So that's what MGM is kind of asking. They're saying to the courts that they filed in, tell us whether or not we are covered under this 2001 terrorism law that makes us essentially exempt from, any lawsuits by victims of terrorism. But, besides the tone deafness of suing the victims, I mean, think about what they're saying there, right? Because this isn't a terrorist attack, right? But wait a minute. How come they're suing to get the court to declare that it was a terror? Yeah, you see what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense to me. So, we just wanted to cover that. I don't know exactly where all that's going to go. I do feel bad for the victims now at this point, having to hire a lawyer to deal with a declaratory judgment action. Hopefully, somebody at MGM takes some heat from this and maybe makes a course correction. I don't know. If not, hopefully the court hammers them and says that, no, they don't fall under this terrorism.
Or hopefully the court will say, prove it.
Yeah. Or say, hey, let's have some discovery first, right?
Obviously, the people who are victims from that tragedy, and families especially, and so they've been dealing with so much pain for the last year. And Morgan, you made this point before, and I think it's one worth repeating, is when you do have some sort of legal battle with someone, it is just that, a battle. It is ongoing, it's all-encompassing, it takes up your mental energy. So these people are trying to heal.
Right.
And whatever, maybe they have lawsuits against MGM too, but this is just one more way that they're dragged into having to deal with this all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't get past it if you're still tied up in a lawsuit, That's tough.
Yes.
Well, we want to welcome our special guest today because I'm really excited. This is a good friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years now, Mike Beltran. And he's running for State House in District 57, which is over in the East County, East Hillsborough. Actually, one of the most conservative areas of Hillsborough County, I believe. And Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, Morgan, thanks for having me. It's great to be on. District 57 is a fantastic area of the county. It's Sun City Center, Balm, Waimama, Riverview, Fishhawk, Boyette, and parts of El Rico. It's a really great place to live. I'm raising my family there now. It's just grown so much over the last decade or two. My wife grew up in that district, was the first homecoming queen at Newsom High School.
Nice.
And they got me to move out there, so now I live down the street from my in-laws. But as you said, it's a very conservative district. My conservative values have been resonating really well with the voters. We've knocked on thousands of doors, and it's really been great.
What made you decide to run?
Well, I've been involved in the political process and different political campaigns for over 20 years now. I started in high school, and I really haven't stopped. And as a practicing lawyer, I see there's a lot of laws I think that could be made a little bit better. And I also see a lot of opportunity to advocate for good conservative values. And I think we, both District 57 and also the conservative movement, need a good advocate in Tallahassee, and I'd like to help with that.
Well, Mike, talk a little bit about your background, because you have a very impressive academic background. You went to Harvard Law School, and you actually clerked here for a local federal judge as well.
Yes, and everyone always asks, "Oh, you went to Harvard Law School and you're still a conservative." Actually, going to Harvard Law School.
That's exactly what I was just thinking.
Yeah, it actually helped me to become more conservative and also to articulate that conservative message better. I got a great education there. We were really able to exchange ideas with people across the political spectrum, and I got to study constitutional law with Reagan's Solicitor General. And even Dean Kagan, who is now gone on the court, and she's known as a liberal justice, but when she was there, she would bring in conservative speakers to the Federalist Society. She would hire conservative professors, and we would have debates, and they were good debates. I think the conservatives usually won them, but she was willing to have those, and we really did have a good exchange of ideas.
Well, we've made a lot of inroads at some of the bastions of liberal constitutional scholarship like Harvard. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Federalist Society that you and I are both involved in. And, of course, the federal judge that you worked for, I also worked for. So that's, I think, how we actually got to know each other, was he introduced the two of us a number of years ago. And so, let's talk some about some of the key issues, though, for your candidacy? I mean, what is your platform? Because I know you've got a few issues that you're really focusing on. So let's give the listeners a rundown of what those are.
Sure. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-Trump. I'm pro-Constitution. I want to protect the Second Amendment. Never going to legislate in derogation of any of our constitutional rights. I'm going to be very strong on crime and immigration. And I believe in limited government. I think if the government is going to tax, it needs to tax to the minimum amount to provide those core services like police, fire, roads, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And if the government's going to regulate, it really needs to think about, do I really need to pass this regulation? How is this going to impact businesses and individuals and their ability to drive economic growth?
Well, your issues are great, but even if I agree or disagree with any of them, I would want to vote for you because you just described a moment ago about how at Harvard you learned how to have discourse and discussion with people to accomplish things, share your opinions, and I think that's something we're losing overall. Right. In society, right?
We really are. I tell you what, in the Whoopi Goldberg, Judge Jeanine Pirro thing this past, I think, Friday or this weekend, whenever it was, on The View, I mean, that was just kind of like par for the course nowadays, where we can't even dialogue with each other. We've got to cuss at each other and throw each other out of the studio. Well, folks, one thing that's not going to happen today here on this show is our friend Mike Beltran is not going to get thrown out of this studio. It helps that we agree with a lot of what he says, but other than that, he's also a very bright man. He's got his own thoughts, and we're going to ask him, Mike, can you stick around for the next segment at least as we go in and talk about some of this Russia stuff and some of what happened last week?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, we'd love to have you stick around. Folks, stay right here. We're coming back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. I'm Roxanne Wilder. We have a very special Oh, I have the hiccups. Did you hear that? I promise I wasn't drinking at lunch. We have a very special guest with us. I'm going to try to say it without hiccups.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you know what the problem is that you're not drinking enough right there.
No.
You tried to eat something right before the end of that break, and then now you need something to chase it.
Yes.
You need a little chaser.
Mike Beltran is with us, and it's so great to talk with you and hear about your campaign, and good luck to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, and we got to jump back and talk about, because all I heard last week was this Russia hysteria. I mean, of course, we got to have our show, but all we knew at that point was that the Helsinki conference had happened. We didn't really know yet what all had come out of it. And I think it was the next day that all of these tweets started coming out. I mean, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, I think Sally Yates and others were all out there tweeting about, this is treason. This is high crimes and misdemeanors, should be leading to impeachment, et cetera, et cetera. Trump actually met with the most evil man who's ever lived, Vladimir Putin. And by meeting with him and talking to him, he committed treason and betrayed our country. I mean, that's what I heard all week long. I don't know about you guys. That's all I could hear. And even from people that I thought, had a little bit of independent thought and could think for themselves, friends of mine, I mean, they were just hammering me on this. And, to me, I have to look at history. And to me, history has to be a bit of our guide here as to what is, a big deal and what's not a big deal. And the first thing that popped into my mind from history, I don't know if you remember it, but was back when George W. Bush met with Vladimir Putin. Remember, he had him out to Crawford Ranch. Had him out to his personal ranch for a couple days for a summit. This isn't, hey, let's meet in Helsinki over near where you live. This is, hey, come on to my vacation home. Come on to the Western White House. Hang out with us. And while they were together, Bush said that he looked into his eyes and got a sense of his soul, and that he was an honest and trustworthy negotiating partner. These are all things, these are quotes from W. Bush.
I don't remember an uproar.
There was no uproar. That's what I'm saying. There was no uproar. And there was no uproar when Hillary Clinton got together with the Russian ambassador and presented him with, remember, one of those Staples buttons or whatever, the red button. They called it the reset button. It just so happened to look like the nuclear launch button. Remember that goofy press conference where we're going to have a reset with Russia? Or do you remember when President Obama was debating Mitt Romney prior to the election? And they asked, who is the biggest threat to the United States? And Mitt Romney says it's Russia. And President Obama came with that line, and he said, the 1980s are calling, and they want their foreign policy back. Ha, 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 ha. And we all laughed. Everybody laughed. Stupid Mitt Romney. You're stuck in the 80s, you dummy. Remember all of that?
The point being, we want to get along with Russia.
The point being, we want to get along with Russia. We've been meeting with Russia for a long time. Let's scale back even a little bit further, and this is one that I think is really important to do. Let's go back to the 1940s and look at some of the stuff that we did with Russia then, because, of course, back then it was called the Soviet Union. But at the Yalta conference, FDR cut a deal with Stalin, and all you got to do is look into this. This history is out there. I'm not making this stuff up. He cut a deal with Stalin to allow the Russians or the Soviets to take over half of Europe, which they did, and that led to the Cold War, which apparently, we claim was actually something that we wanted to win as opposed to something that we just wanted to have going on for economic reasons. But the bigger picture point is really that we have made deals with Russia at many times in the past, and one of the ones that I wanted to point out is called Operation Keelhaul, and that's one of the things that happened at Yalta, and that's where we actually, the Allies agreed, the British and the Americans agreed to repatriate 2.5 million former Russian citizens and others who were dissidents from Russia, Tsarist forces and others, and Polish folks that were part of the Polish resistance, Czechoslovakian folks that were part of the resistance that fought with the Allies during World War II. We turned them back over to the Soviet Union. They were pretty much all liquidated, never to be heard from again. So we turned our own allies, 2.5 million of them, over to Stalin to be killed. And this is back in 1945. So I don't think that President Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and maybe making some comments that would try to create some sort of a rapport there is the end of the world.
But the New York Times had all kinds of headlines, including the accounts. This isn't a headline, but within the story, the accounts of the meeting represent the first public indication that at least some of the campaign were willing to accept Russian help. How?
Right.
There's no elaboration beyond that.
Right. Because look, if there was any kind of a smoking gun, we would have seen it. And, it's funny because we have Pat, if I can get your attention there, we have a clip that we want to run because, we love Louis Gohmert here, the congressman from Texas. And, he came out because of all these folks, because of Brennan, Clapper, Comey, all these bad actors are making so much noise about it. And I thought he had a great comment on it.
When I hear Brennan or Clapper either say the kind of things they've been saying recently, then it tells me, wow, we must be getting close to them. Those guilty dogs are barking pretty loud.
He comes out with some zingers.
I love Louis Gohmert. I just want to hang out with him all the time and just have him attack people, but he's so on point. I mean, he really is. He really, like you said, he comes out with some great zingers. And, of course, over the weekend, I don't know if it was exactly over the weekend, but we got this FISA application for the wiretapping of Carter Page was released. Now, it's heavily redacted, what's been released, but I think that was partly in response to all of the hysteria that we were hearing out of our former heads of our intelligence agencies, Brennan and Clapper, what they were putting out there on tweets, suggesting that they knew something more maybe than what we know about things, and maybe we ought to just kind of trust their judgment on it. Okay, so I think then the current Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, who's known for declassifying things when I think it looks like the American public is getting hoodwinked, they went ahead and declassified and released that FISA application. Now, again, heavily redacted, but there are a couple things that jump out at you from that, and that is that, one, although there are some other things mentioned, it is basically, the application is all based on the Steele dossier, the Christopher Steele dossier. The other thing that jumps out at me, taking a look at it, is that the FBI was using, what they were doing is they were leaking information to the media, and then they were using those media reports as though it was some kind of an independent investigation. Like those reporters actually looked into it and came up with this stuff on their own.
But they didn't.
But they didn't. The FBI leaked it to them. So it's not confirmation of the FBI's investigation, because now some independent reporters also doing an investigation coming up with the same answer. No, the independent reporter is just repeating the answer that the FBI's already said. So it's not confirmation of anything. And they had to know that. Those agents had to know that when they were doing it.
Yeah, if I just go back to the FISA applications, I just point out that the FISA court is an ex parte court, which means that you don't have somebody pushing back on the government the way you do in a criminal prosecution or even a civil case. It's just the government going in by itself and asking for these warrants. Mm-hmm. And so you have a heightened duty of disclosure to be honest and to give the full information, even information that doesn't help your case, the way you wouldn't in an open and adversarial proceeding. And the government didn't even meet the burden that it would have in an open and adversarial proceeding. They omitted things, and they actually twisted and falsified some of those facts that they submitted in support of that application.
Well, and like the fact that they didn't point out that it was bought and paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign. I mean, they didn't point out that it was opposition research. And what they did was they slipped a little something into a footnote that, okay, in hindsight, maybe sort of reveals that fact. But to me, you can't slip that into a footnote. That's not where that kind of information belongs. And I thought that was misleading. I mean, obviously the information was somewhat in there in that footnote that it was a political document. But really, shouldn't that have been up front? Shouldn't you have just said, hey, now look, we just want you to know, just being up front, this was put together by the opposing candidates' research team. But we think that there may be some validity to it nonetheless. I mean, wouldn't that have been a more cards face up and appropriate way to approach, like you said, Mike, an ex parte proceeding? Yeah. As a lawyer, you're obligated in ex parte type proceedings to bring information to the judge, to the court, that might even be, like you said, harmful to your case. And that's because there's nobody there for the other side to do it.
And it's because of the enormous powers that are given both to the intelligence agencies and to the FISA court, that you can spy pretty much on anyone, anywhere, anytime. And the other thing I would point out is that the Democrats have essentially weaponized these intelligence agencies, both during the Obama administration and still with this independent counsel investigation. And, for a long time, we were talking about the Hillary Clinton email investigation. They were talking about lock her up. We didn't do that. We showed mercy on our opponents. And even though we're now in power, they haven't shown that mercy upon us. And I think that's very disappointing, and it doesn't contribute to a good bipartisan atmosphere in Washington or anywhere else.
Well, it's creating, like you say, that atmosphere for blood sport where, okay, there are no rules. It's just complete and absolute warfare, and then the ends justify the means. And I think that's what the commies want. We're coming right back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Boy, we've got a great guest in here today. We've got a gentleman who is so knowledgeable about all the issues that we just love talking about here on the Morgan Streetman Show. And his name is Mike Beltran. And we're very pleased to have him here. He's running for State House in District 57, which is over in southeast Hillsborough County. Probably the most Republican and conservative area of Hillsborough County, I would say.
It is. Yeah.
And so it's appropriate that that's where you live and run, sir, because you are a good conservative and a scholar.
He seems pretty sharp. That's what I was going to say. He seems like he has his stuff together.
Extremely sharp. And, he's also got his own law firm and Beltran Litigation. And you ought to check out his website. He's got a really cool website. He's done some great work before. In fact, we've worked on similar cases before. In other words, he's worked on some of the same stuff that I've worked on, not at exactly the same time. But I've gotten a chance to actually look at some of his work, the court papers that he files, and his stuff is just impeccable. It's excellent. You can really tell that he just absorbed everything he could from Judge Merriday when he worked for Judge Merriday all those years ago. Mm-hmm. So highly recommend him, particularly if you've got a really thorny legal problem in federal court.
20 or 30 years ago, you would not even be needed in that part of Hillsborough County, though, because there was nothing out there.
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing.
You would have only had Sun City.
There was just one, that iguana farm out there. No, there's no iguana farm out there. There was literally nothing out there.
Now it's one of the busiest areas.
Well, it's booming, just like the state of Florida's booming.
It's a really, as a small business owner, I've been running my own firm for 5 years. I understand business, and I've really seen the growth that we've had with the good conservative policies that we've had here in Florida. I'm a small business owner. I'm also a lawyer, and it's just been great to operate in that area of the county.
Well, and we've covered that here on this show before. That's what people are really concerned about, and it's like we keep going back to James Carville because he just said it so bluntly. He said it's the economy, stupid. And, there was a recent Gallup poll that came out and basically covered, how much do Americans really even care about Russia? And the truth is, it doesn't seem that they really care all that much. They're much more focused on immigration and on the economy. And so I think that's really important, and we've got a lot of, great things going on with the economy. I did want to just kind of mention, because, us political hacks like me, we can't give up on some of this Russia stuff because it just drives you so insane. But I wanted to mention something because this may become noteworthy very soon here, and that is what James Clapper said on Saturday on Anderson Cooper on CNN. And he said if it weren't, and I'm quoting here, if it weren't for President Obama, we might not have done the intelligence community assessment that we did that set up a whole sequence of events which are still unfolding today, including Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. President Obama is responsible for that. It was he who tasked us to do that intelligence community assessment in the first place. Now, I think that's really interesting because we have not heard that before, although we've suspected that that's what happened. We've never heard any of the rats on the sinking ship actually say that's what happened. And now here we go. Clapper's saying it. Oh, yeah, no, that was all Obama. Can't blame me. I was only following orders. That came from President Obama. So I think that's a pretty interesting statement and maybe indicative of where things are going as folks try and shed blame from themselves and put it onto other people.
So he's trying to blame Obama, and what would that mean? What would that indicate was happening at that time? Well,
like Mr. Beltran said earlier, and you said, I think this is like the weaponization of our intelligence services by one political party, President Obama's Democrats, against candidate and then President Trump. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we've ever had it happen in such a broad scale, and certainly in times past there hasn't been the ability to conduct electronic surveillance with the ease that there is today, and also to go back historically. In other words, you could pick a person today and now look back historically across their communications going back months and years. In the past, you couldn't do that. We couldn't manage information as easily as we can today. So it's a lot easier to abuse in today's environment. But I truly believe that this is the worst scandal in American political history. This makes Watergate. I mean, first of all, anybody who actually looks into Watergate, which is basically no one, Watergate was not that big of a deal. If you actually study it. Now, everybody's probably going to say, oh, Streetman, you don't know what you're talking about. And unfortunately, if you feel that way, you need to do more looking into it because, trust me, I do know what I'm talking about. Watergate really was not a big deal. But nevertheless, this is a huge scandal because it involves taking big parts of the government, the executive branch, and also administrative agencies, and using them against a political candidate for political reasons. We can't allow that. Somebody has to be held accountable. And now the folks that are involved are all pointing the finger at President Obama. Well, not all of them, but James Clapper is the first one to say, no, it was Obama. Look at him. Talk to him. You got a problem with that? Talk to the boss.
Well, the guy who's out of office, who's not there anymore. That's who you always blame.
Well, of course, yeah. Well, I just say more things are coming from that. Now, let's flip over and let's talk more about the economy, though, because that gets me really excited, the Florida economy. And I remember moving here to Florida in 1984, and there were 7 million people in this state at the time. And I remember a picture of Vinny Testaverde out on his cigarette boat in Tampa Bay. I don't know if you remember that, way back when. Now there are over 21 million people in the state of Florida now. So it's 3 times larger than it was back then.
We know that from driving around.
Woo-wee. But thankfully, the economy's booming.
Mm-hmm, it is. And you know what I like? Some of the signs that you see. First of all, unemployment in the last quarter, comparing it to the last quarter, has stayed the same. Mm-hmm. And we know it's been lower recently. And we've seen job growth in many areas. But this is a really interesting statistic when it comes to real estate. you can still, the Tampa Bay area in particular is still ranked particularly high as far as buying for first-time home buyers. When you look at that list of, the top 10 cities nationally, or I should say regions that are where you can still get a good first-time home buying, a good price. In Tampa Bay is one of the biggest cities on that list, or biggest areas on that list. So what an anomaly to be a big area with kind of a big city feel, and yet you can still buy good real estate. So that's a sign of a healthy economy as far as our direct surrounding areas, and also Florida. We talked about that last week, Morgan. Florida's off the chart in terms of growth. Well,
so we're probably one of the best, most affordable, bigger cities that you can live in, because we have the ability for first-time homebuyers to actually be able to purchase something that they can afford, but then they can access all of the amenities of bigger cities. And gosh, we have so many amenities here in the Bay Area, not just our city, not just our cities, but our beaches and our rivers and things, and some of that out in East Hillsborough. I mean, you've got some beautiful rivers out there, and some really underappreciated areas of the Tampa Bay area out there to explore.
Yeah, we do. And, one of the issues facing our district is that, we need better roads out there. A lot of folks don't come out, once you go past the crosstown, it's just surface roads, and they all need to be widened. Lithia, Pinecrest, Boyette, Fishhawk Boulevard, Bell Shoals, those roads all need to be widened, and for different reasons, the money hasn't been directed towards that, and that'll be one of my missions as a state legislator.
If I'm not mistaken, you're having a lot of construction, a lot of building in your area, a lot of growth.
We're having a lot of growth, and the growth is great. I mean, in the last 20 years, it's gone from, as one of y'all was saying, from really being a ranch, as Fishhawk Ranch is named, to really being an exurb with just 20,000 people in Fishhawk alone. And obviously, we have various other communities in our district that are also growing, and we just need to make sure that the infrastructure keeps up with that, because that is one of the core functions of government, and we need to make sure that we're developing that infrastructure and it's not lagging behind the development, unfortunately, as it has been.
One of the interesting things to me is always, the development and then the infrastructure, because it does seem to me that in Florida, our real estate developers come in and they do a lot of development, but then they don't always seem to be responsible for making sure that the infrastructure is up to par to support the development they're doing.
And that's a lot of that responsibility falls on the government.
That does, and you have to make sure that the government officials need to be holding everyone's feet to the fire and making sure that's going to happen. And you need good, strong leaders in order to accomplish that.
And that we're not over-subsidizing developers who are already making money on the project, and now they're just going to be making more money because we're sort of subsidizing them. I mean, we need to a degree, and I'm not anti-development, but I think that developers need to fully internalize the costs of their development as well.
And that's actually in the developer's interests, because if you build those roads, the property values are going to be good. The developer is going to have a good reputation for developing that infrastructure, and folks are going to buy in future developments that developer may develop. So it's just a matter of making sure we're coordinating everything and making sure these communities that are being built are as best as they can be.
Well, I tell you what, I am excited about Florida's future. I mean, we've had so many people move into this state, both from Puerto Rico and from other states, and there's going to continue to be an exodus from other states with some of the changes to the tax laws, where you can't write off your local taxes anymore. I mean, that's going to drive a lot of people to the states with no state income tax, and like Florida.
Yeah, and I think Florida's growth, particularly here in Hillsborough County, particularly in my district, is because of those good, conservative, pro-business policies, low tax and low regulation, where the government is largely hands off of the economy. That's not just a nice political tagline. That is the recipe for economic success. And that is a recipe for building a vibrant community. And that's why I believe in those principles, and why I would hope to implement them if elected.
We've seen a lot of good statistics recently, too, about small business growth in the state of Florida and then in the Tampa Bay area as well. And small business, that's the lifeblood of the community often, and that's something like you just described, those principles. Small business growth is supported by those same principles.
Yeah, we can't. I mean, it's the ideas that folks have up in your old stomping grounds up there in Brooklyn with this lady.
I lived in Brooklyn before it was cool.
That's right. That's right. You got out of there just in time.
That was a long time ago.
Got out of there just in time. Because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is now apparently sort of the dominant mindset for Brooklyn, and that is this whole, what they call Democrat Socialists of America. Of course, we also could refer to them simply, I think, as communists, although they would not like that label. I think they're close enough to make it a distinction really without a difference. And the idea that that is somehow the dominant economic model among a whole class of voters, a whole class of people, a lot of people say that that's kind of one of the dominant thought processes among millennials. And I'm not sure if that's exactly the case or not, but the idea that socialism could be the dominant model and what people think is actually going to work when we have so many examples. In fact, we don't have an example where it has worked well. We have so many examples, and I don't want to hear about Scandinavia, okay, because we could talk about that all day long, and we have. But let's look at real-world examples. Let's look at places like Venezuela, where they don't have enough water to drink, clean water, and toilet paper. So you got these Democrat socialists here, these communists here, talking about universal basic income. And exactly how does that work in a country like Venezuela when nobody is incentivized to produce anything or to do anything? How does that even work? Because there is no income to spread around. There's no toilet paper. And is that how you want it to be in Brooklyn, USA and other places? I know I don't. When we come back, we're going to talk about General Patton.
Oh, we've had such a great show today with Mike Beltran here.
Hasn't that been fun? We should do this more often.
I do like having a guest in studio with us, but this is the time, Mike, when we go out there with Morgan Streetman, and he takes us to a topic that you might not encounter in the regular news cycle, as are most of our stories, but this one in particular.
This is a really interesting story. And folks, if you're into history, and particularly into World War II history, I'd encourage you to go out there and buy a book. And the book is called Target Patton. Now, this book was written by a guy named Robert Wilcox, who's a former journalist for the Miami Herald and the New York Times. Has also written for television and other things. He's kind of known as a historical writer, sort of a nonfiction examiner of historical things, who also gets really interesting information and tries to solve historical mysteries. So the book that he wrote, Target Patton, which is absolutely fascinating, basically the thesis of the book, and it really has got some amazing evidence to back it up, is that General George S. Patton, old blood and guts, was not killed accidentally in the European theater in December of 1945, that he was actually assassinated by what was the precursor to the CIA called the OSS. And that sounds crazy, right? Why would we assassinate our own general? But he actually gets into the history, and I think this is so apropos as we talk about Russia, because one thing that General Patton understood was that Russia was America's foe. And General Patton wanted to, and we very easily could have at that point in the war, he wanted to just go ahead and keep going with his army and go ahead and fight Russia and defeat Russia. And at that point, Russia was basically exhausted. They had just barely outlasted the Nazis and just barely survived their own invasion of Russia, which they were then basically coming back from. But they were in an extremely weakened position in terms of the men that they had available and also particularly the materiel. Remember, for a lot of the Russian campaign, they couldn't even give their new soldiers rifles. For many of the battles, the model was go out and find a rifle from somebody who's already been shot. Pick that one up, and there's your rifle. Now, this book, Target Patton, is just, it's fascinating. I'd highly encourage you to go out there and read it, because what happens is this guy basically gets in touch with, and I forget exactly how it happens. It's been a number of years since I've read it, but he gets in touch with this guy named Doug Bazata, who claims that he was an OSS assassin. Okay, now this guy died in 1998, but what's interesting is there's a lot of circumstantial and supporting evidence to back up his claim that he was actually an OSS agent and that he was involved in assassinations. And this guy confesses in great detail to the book's author, Robert Wilcox. He confesses in great detail about how they actually conducted the assassination of Patton. And, Patton had been, if you don't know this, he'd been basically relieved of his command a couple of months beforehand by Dwight Eisenhower, or Ike. And that was because Ike was basically cutting deals with the British and cutting deals with the Russians about who would control Europe post-war. And, of course, as we mentioned earlier, FDR was doing the same types of things. All of American government was cutting deals with the Russians, and the end result of that was we gave half of Europe to the Russians. We didn't have to do that. They couldn't have taken it from us. There was no reason to have the Iron Curtain. There was no reason for all of that. We actually set that up by making agreements to allow that to happen way back in 1945. Well, one of the key people in the entire U.S. military who was against this, also, I believe he may have been the wealthiest U.S. military officer of all time, which is an interesting factoid. I know he's a very wealthy guy from his family. Was General Patton. And he wanted to ride ahead and basically take on the Russians now before they get any more powerful. There's no reason to wait. We're in a good position. They're in a bad position, and we can do this now. And again, because of that, he had, when you read the book, you'll see he had things like his gasoline cut off from his army, so he couldn't even move. They were stuck because they couldn't get any gas supply. Okay, and that was all done by Eisenhower. And then on December 9th, 1945, which again is only about a couple of months after Patton had his command taken away, he was actually out pheasant hunting for the morning and coming back to camp, and his limo was actually crashed into by an army truck. And it's a very, very suspicious set of circumstances how this went down. It's kind of hard to describe, but the truck basically turned right in front of the limo at a very short, with no notice. So it'd basically be like turning in front of an oncoming car when you could clearly see the car is coming, and just doing it at the last minute to make sure that the car hits you. That's what happened. And then allegedly Patton flew forward and broke his neck. But what this assassin, Doug Bazata, says was actually that he had a kind of a weapon that he could shoot, and that Patton was riding along and basically had his window down, was looking out the window, and this guy had an OSS weapon which would fire a rock. It would fire a rock, not a bullet. It sounds crazy, but it was kind of like I'm thinking like a crossbow slingshot type of a setup that would propel a rock. And basically what he did was he stood behind some cover as Patton's limo came along. That truck turned into the path of the limo. The limo slammed on brakes, and it was right at that moment that the guy shot Patton in the forehead with this rock gun. Wow. Now, it's a pretty crazy story, but it's also pretty crazy that the limo, you ought to see these roads because you can see the pictures of them. You're talking about mud that's like a foot deep. So these cars were not, haul and tail. They claimed the limo was going 35 miles an hour. It's hard for me to believe that at 35 miles an hour you can be propelled into a partition. Remember, it is a limo, so he had a big area that he was sitting in. They actually thrown forward into the partition hard enough to break your neck. And then there's all kinds of other... I feel like I'm really getting into the weeds here, but you got to read the book because there's all kinds of other suspicious things that happened, which includes the fact that Patton survived that crash, and it looked like he was going to get better because, he didn't die from a broken neck or anything. They claim he broke his neck, but that didn't kill him, and he was actually on the process of getting better at the hospital when what happened was he had a pulmonary edema, which is like basically like
an embolism?
Yeah, there you go, an embolism. So a pocket of gas got into his bloodstream, I guess, and wound up killing him. I think that's what an edema is. Anyway, there's some question as to how that happened, and that's sort of fleshed out in the book. But folks, this is not the O'Reilly book called Killing Patton. I didn't read that one. I do know some folks that have read it. My understanding is that one doesn't even really address this issue that Target Patton is all about, which is the story of OSS assassin Doug Bazata. And, it goes as far as his meetings with Wild Bill Donovan, the originator of the OSS. Oh, Wild Bill. That's a pretty interesting moniker that he gave himself, Wild Bill, considering that he was a white shoe lawyer from New York. I mean, he was a Wall Street lawyer. So, but he was a wild man, as were many of those OSS and CIA guys early on. But folks, if you're interested in the Patton thing, and particularly in Russian collusion and all this other stuff, you got to go out there and read that book, Target Patton. It's fascinating. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were those of Morgan Streetman and are not those of Beasley Media Group, this station, its management, or other hosts or advertisers.
Tampa Bay's business address is Money Talk 1010 AM and available on HD at 99.5 HD2. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Money Talk 1010 AM. Tampa Bay's business address.